The Canterville Ghost. Chapter 1. Canterville Castle. Mr. Otis looked at the castle with delight. "I'll buy it," he cried. "Excellent," replied his guide, Lord Canterville. "But perhaps I should warn you. Canterville Castle is haunted. My family had to move out many years ago, after my great-aunt had a dreadful experience." "A skeleton!" "She never recovered." Mr. Otis wasn't worried. He didn't believe in ghosts. "I'm sure my family and I will be very happy here." "Well, don't say I didn't warn you." A week later, Mr. and Mrs. Otis arrived with their children, Washington, Virginia, and the twins. They were greeted by an old woman who was neatly dressed in a white apron and a cap. "Welcome to Canterville Castle. I'm Mrs. Umney, the housekeeper," she said. "Come inside. There's a tea for you in the library." "Cake!" shouted the twins, diving in. Virginia wasn't interested in the food. She had spotted a poem in the library window. "If a child will enter the secret room and stay till the dead of the night, then at last Sir Simon can sleep in his tomb, and at Canterville all will be right." "What does it mean?" Before she could show her father, Mrs. Otis cried out, "Oh dear! I'm afraid we've spilled something on the carpet. Mrs. Umney." "It wasn't you, madam," replied Mrs. Umney in a hushed voice. "Blood has been spilled there." "How horrible!" cried Mrs. Otis. "It must be removed at once." "Real blood! Oh!" Mrs. Umney looked around nervously and began to speak in a low voice. "It is the blood of Lady Eleanor Canterville. She was murdered on that very spot by her husband, Sir Simon Canterville, 500 years ago." "Oh dear!" 7 years later, Sir Simon Canterville disappeared. His body has never been found. Mrs. Umney's voice began to shake. "His spirit haunts this house. That blood stain will never go." "Who believes that ghost nonsense?" Washington jumped down onto the carpet and scrubbed at the blood stain. Within seconds, it was gone. But as he stood up, there was a crash of thunder and a terrible flash of lightning. Mrs. Umney fainted. The thunderstorm lasted the entire night. Rain lashed at the windows and the wind howled down the chimneys. And next morning, in the very same spot on the library carpet, there was the blood again. She's fainted again. I wish she wouldn't. She's rather heavy. Chapter 2. Clanking Chains. How could this have happened? Don't worry, Papa. I'll clean it up again. There must be a simple explanation, cried Mr. Otis. That night, Mr. Otis locked the library door himself and took the key to bed with him. But the blood stain still came back. Help! Help! It's here again! Perhaps ghosts do exist. After what happened the following night, Mr. Otis thought differently about ghosts. At midnight, he was woken by a strange noise outside his room. It sounded like rusty chains being dragged along the ground, and it seemed to be coming closer with every second. What's that noise? Mr. Otis was annoyed. He put on his slippers and picked up a small bottle from his bedside table. Then he opened the door. To a terrible sight. An old man with long greasy hair and rugged clothes was glaring at him out of fiery red eyes. You must be Sir Simon, said Mr. Otis calmly. I'm afraid, my dear sir, I must ask you to oil your chains. They make an awful noise. This bottle of oil should help. I have more if you needed it. Mr. Otis left the bottle on a table and went back to bed. For a moment, the Canterville ghost was still. Then he smashed the bottle of oil onto the floor and fled down the corridor, howling. Ooh, ooh. The twins heard him. As Sir Simon reached the top of the stairs, they raced out of their bedroom with a pillow. Sir Simon felt a rush of air as the pillow whizzed past his head. It very nearly hit him. Take that, Slimmy Simon. We are not scared of you. The ghost quickly vanished, to appear in his secret chamber in the west wing. He was furious. I have been scaring people for hundreds of years, he grumbled, but never have I been treated like this. They should have been terrified. How dare these
Canterville Ghost
give me oil for my chains
Chapter
and
5
throw pillows at my
The
head?
Secret Chamber.
I must get my revenge.
Some weeks later, Virginia was out walking in the fields when she tore her dress climbing through a hedge. Oh no, Mama will be furious. I'll have to change, she thought, and decided to go up the back staircase so she wouldn't be seen. On the way, she noticed that the door to the tapestry room was open. How odd, she thought. No one ever uses the tapestry room. Virginia peered round the door. To her surprise, she saw the Canterville ghost. So Simon was sitting by the window, his head in his hands. He looked so upset, Virginia thought she should try and comfort him. "We thought you'd gone." "Cheer up," she said. "The boys are going to school tomorrow, so the tricks will stop. Besides, if you behave yourself, no one will annoy you." "You don't understand." Sir Simon jumped up. "How can I behave myself?" he shouted. "I have to rattle my chains and groan through keyholes and walk around at night. I am a ghost." "You don't have to do anything," said Virginia. "What's more, you've been very wicked. Mrs. Omni told us that you murdered your wife. It's wrong to kill people," she pointed out. "Very wrong indeed." "Yes, it was wrong," sighed Sir Simon. "But that was no reason for her brothers to starve me to death." "Oh, poor ghost," said Virginia. "I didn't know about that. Are you hungry now? Perhaps you'd like some sandwiches." "No, thank you," he answered. "I never eat now. But it's kind of you to offer. You know," he added, "you are much nicer than the rest of your horrible family." "How dare you be rude about my family?" cried Virginia. "You are mean, you lie, and you stole all the paints out of my paint box for that blood stain. First my reds, then the yellows, even the greens. I couldn't paint anything." "I think you should apologize," Virginia demanded. The ghost shrugged. "I don't see why I should. After all, what else could I do? Real blood is so hard to get hold of these days, and your brother would keep cleaning up." "Fine," said Virginia. "If you won't apologize, I'm leaving." She turned to go. "No, please don't go. Please help me." Sir Simon called. "I'm so unhappy and so very, very tired." Now Virginia was curious. "Why are you tired? Can't you sleep?" "Not a wink. I haven't slept for 500 years, Sir Simon told her. Virginia gasped. "And it would be so pleasant to lie in the soft brown earth," the ghost went on, "with grasses waving above my head, listening to silence." "Can't anyone help you?" asked Virginia. "You could," whispered the ghost. Virginia trembled as he spoke, and a cold shudder passed through her. "How?" she asked. "Have you ever read the poem on the library window?" "Yes, often." Virginia thought of it now. "If a child will enter the secret room and stay till the dead of the night, then at last Sir Simon can sleep in his tomb, and at Canterville all will be right." "But I don't know what it means." "It means," said the ghost, "that you must come with me to my secret chamber and pray for me." "That sounds easy," said Virginia. said Sir Simon, "but no living person has ever entered the chamber and come out alive." Virginia was terrified, but she did want to help. "I'll come with you, Sir Simon," she said bravely. "Lead the way." Sir Simon took her hand in his cold, clammy fingers. Together they walked to the end of the room, where the wall disappeared before her eyes. In a moment the wall had closed behind them, and Virginia vanished into the ghost's secret chamber. Chapter 6. Peace at Last. 10 minutes later, the bell rang for tea. As Virginia did not appear, Mrs. Otis sent a footman to find her. "I can't find her anywhere, madam." At first, Mrs. Otis thought she must be in the stables. When Virginia still hadn't returned 2 hours later, she began to panic. "Boys," she called to her sons, "go and see if you can find her." "She's vanished." "Oh, where can she be?" Mrs. Otis even asked Mr. Otis to drain the fish pond, but there was no sign of Virginia anywhere. At last, the family sat down to supper. It was a sad meal, and hardly anyone spoke. Even the twins were quiet. As the family left the dining room, the clock in the tower began to strike midnight. "Everyone to bed now. I'll never be able to sleep." On the last stroke, there was a crash and a sudden, shrill cry. A panel at the top of the staircase flew back, and Virginia staggered out. Everyone rushed up to her. Mrs. Otis hugged her. Mr. Otis patted her head, and twins danced around them all. "Where have you been?" said Mrs. Otis, rather angrily. "I've been so worried. You must not play tricks, Virginia." "Except on the ghost." "I've been with the ghost," said Virginia quietly. "He's gone. He's been very wicked, but he was sorry for everything he'd done. And look, he gave me this box of jewels just before he left." 4 days later, they held a funeral for Sir Simon. The procession left Canterville Castle at 11 o'clock at night. The carriages were drawn by 4 black horses, each with a great tuft of ostrich feathers on its head. "Don't you think 500 years is rather long to wait for a funeral?" Lord Canterville came all the way from Wales to take part. He sat in the first carriage with Virginia. Then came Mr. and Mrs. Otis, followed by Washington and the twins. It was all wonderfully impressive. In the last carriage sat Mrs. Umney. After all, she had been frightened of the ghost for 50 years. It was only fair she should see the last of him. "Are you sure he's gone?" The next day, Mr. Otis had a word with Lord Canterville. "I think we should return the box of jewels to you. They are beautiful. especially the ruby necklace. Please take them." "No, thank you, Mr. Otis," replied Lord Canterville. "The jewels were given to Virginia for being so brave, and I think she deserves them." Virginia wore the ruby necklace whenever she went to a party. But, however much Washington and the twins begged, she never told anyone what happened in the secret chamber. Sir Simon Canterville, R.I.P.